ladies and gentlemen, another episode of Mixed Mental Arts with Bryan Callen. I was told to use, I was told, dude, call it Bryan Callen, call it the Bryan Callen Experience, and then call it Mixed Mental Arts. But I was like, I can't do it. Anyway, doesn't matter. Hunter Mott's Bryan Callen here with Dan Coyle, who wrote a book that I've, there's certain books you quote a lot, you talk a lot about, the Talent Code, where he basically went and found the most effective coaches in the world and studied what the through lines were. And the last time when we did a podcast about that book, you said you kept meeting the same person over and over again.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. But now, and the book kind of takes some of the mystique out of excellence, genius, and these words we throw around.
Right.
Because you get into something called deep practice and the difference. And it's just it's an amazing book. And now you've done it again, ladies and gentlemen. You've done it again with the Culture Code. Because with the Culture Code, you have studied highly effective groups and the culture that makes them effective. SEAL Team 6, Popovich's The Spurs, a group of jewelry thieves. That was really fascinating. So I can't wait to get into this because it was just, I don't know. And now you're working with the Cleveland Indians. And they will win a World Series, ladies and gentlemen. They will win. If Dan Coyle has anything to say about it. So anyway.
Yeah.
There it is. Welcome.
It's good to be here. It's really good to be here, and I can't take any credit for what the Indians are accomplishing. But man, oh man, it's been fun to watch, talk about culture, and it's fun to talk to you guys.
Thank you, and I can see that the view of beautiful Cleveland behind you. He's got these two.
But also, did you notice that Dan just practiced what he preaches in the book? Like, he didn't take any credit for it. He gave it all away. He said it was all the team. And that is really, I mean, that's the thing.
Well, he's the Dave Cooper of writing. and Dave Cooper was the one SEAL Team 6 guy that everybody's like, he's the dude. And Dave Cooper said something like, well, you can call me Dave Cooper, fuckface, whatever. I answered all three. And I thought, what an awesome way to kind of intro yourself.
Yeah, what a guy.
Yeah. And then you break down Google, too, which is that it's an idea dojo, that they played this full contact hockey.
Yep.
And their idea sessions were the same way. And I guess that was Larry Page and his philosophy.
Totally. I mean, this book was an excuse to go inside all these places and see the patterns that connect them. And we always think of them as, we think of culture as being all these like soft skills. Like, you talk about culture, you talk about leadership and values and trust and voice and teamwork and all this stuff, right? But you get down to it, it's not. It's more like mixed mental arts. I mean, there is a hard thing there. There's like these clear signals these places are sending. And so it was a blast to it's just, really fun to sort of parachute into these places for a few days and then hang out with these people and then say, hey, it sort of feels like magic, but it's actually not magic. It's like, it's performance. It's a group talent.
And one question that I have that I've been noodling over is that there's such a through line to your work, right? Like it's clear that Dan Coyle personally is on a journey with the Talent Code and with the Culture Code. And my question is, why that journey? Like, why has this spoken to you so much emotionally?
You're going deep, aren't you? Wow.
Hunter's always got to get into the emotion.
Dude.
He's always got into the emotion, man.
All right, here it is. Here's the scene.
He's a real left-winger.
Here's the scene. There's three little kids. They're all boys. They're raised in Alaska, and they're in the mid-60s, and they're 1 year apart, and the one in the middle is like competing with the others all the time. Like, that's the primal scene right there, I think. And then it's like, wow, how do I beat those guys? And they were kind of hard to beat. You know what I mean? So I had to figure it out how to do it. Like, what's that made of? And I think that was part of it. The other part was my dad used to work in a beer factory and had to always look inside the beer to see if there were any, see what was inside it. So maybe looking inside stuff would be so you got beer factory, competitive little kids, adds up to this emotional through line.
Dan Coyle.
That's right.
And great book. Well, you know what's interesting is that you kind of, so when it comes to cultures that work, sometimes it's a free-for-all, it's a scrum.
Yep.
But other times, like with Popovich, or, and even with SEAL Team 6, well, at least with Popovich, there's one authoritarian figure with a volcanic temper.
Yep.
But he somehow gets his men to walk through fire for him.
That's right.
So there is a difference. One would think that there's sort of an idea dojo where the best idea wins.
Right.
Which I think has always made sense.
Right.
But it does seem like probably with SEAL Team 6, the orders come from on high, don't they? And then sort of they're executed because everybody knows exactly what their role is.
It's that. It's that kind of the way to picture a group functioning. I think in some ways, whether it's SEAL Team 6 or the Spurs or anything, it's like when they encounter a problem, they're like a school of fish moving through the problem. Like they can figure it out on their own all together, whether it's with a basketball or whether it's with a gun or whatever. In fact, the SEALs call their missions playing pickup basketball. Like we are a group mind solving this problem right now. I'm gonna have the ball for a second, then I'm gonna pass it to you, and you're gonna know where to go, right? But that only happens when there's this intense connection that really is about signaling safety. Like our brains are ready to click off and switch out of a group at any moment, and these groups understand that, so they are very alert to constantly. And Popovich is the greatest example of this, constantly connecting to his guys because. When we see him on TV, we see a guy screaming, right? We see a guy red in the face. He looks authoritarian. Go behind the scenes. And what you'll see is he walks up to his players, puts his hand on their shoulders, and asks them about how their dinner was last night, the dinner that he arranged for them, and the dinner that he ordered wine for. Like
I love that, by the way. I love that he would have huge dinners.
Huge. They have these really, really meaningful gatherings, and at the end of the year, they all get like a commemorative book with the menus of the place they visited, with the wines they drank, the labels of the wines they drank. God. So these they're little. You always hear that cliche like leadership is all about the little things and all this stuff you hear 1,000 times. Well, it's not just about little things. It's about these connections of safety, right? Like he creates such safety with them. On the day that I visited, I wrote about it in the book. I thought they were going to watch game film because they had been beaten the night before, and so they go into the room to watch the film. And what comes up is a CNN documentary on the Civil Rights Voting Act of 1968. So they watch it together, and it's like, God, and then he starts asking them, like, "What do you think of that? What would you have done if you were a kid if you were a young man in 1968? What would you have done?" And he looks at them and connects to them as whole people.
He's creating a bond, isn't he? He's creating a language.
Exactly.
He's creating a shared experience, and by the way, an emotional experience.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
God, it's such a genius thing. Do you know where he learned that? Where did he figure that out?
I think in the Air Force. I think that was part. He had this really weird sort of this very diverse childhood where he spent time at kind of a groovy college in California where he was a young coach, but he also was in the Air Force. So he approaches. It's very dojo is he approaches emotional stuff with this incredible discipline. And to me, that's the big secret takeaway for leaders. Like they're able to be emotional athletes, like meaning I'm going to deliver that signal right now. And I am going to, it's not fake, but it's like, it still takes an act of will and intention to say, I'm going to try to connect with this player who's kind of been a jerk lately, and I'm going to reach out to them, and I'm going to make him a reservation for dinner, and I'm going to touch him on the shoulder, and we're going to talk. We're going to have a real talk. Like that's kind of hard to do, and he can do it because he brings that level of discipline and care. So one of the guys said, "Pop, like he'll tell you the truth, and he'll love you to death." Like that's what all these guys do. They tell you the truth, which can be hard, but they love you to death.
Yeah, and the truth is going to get you where you need to get to.
Yeah.
When I did a movie with Laurence Fishburne one time, and Laurence Fishburne's he's a Hall of Famer, been in everything. And he came in and he goes, I mean, this is a huge movie where it's probably costing $1 million a day. I don't know. And it's starring with Kevin Hart. And it's a big movie. And he comes in and it's a fight scene. And then, we have to be there and we're shooting and it's big. And he goes, and when you do that, you've got stuntmen, you've got set, you've got everything. And Laurence Fishburne went, scene doesn't work. You know that, right? And everybody went, and the director and everybody went, and Tim's a great guy. Tim Story goes, and a big director, he goes, it doesn't work. And Larry goes, no, not at all. But and then he looks up and he goes, well, we're going to fix it. We're going to fix it.
Holy
and he
shit.
smiled and just looked at and we all went, damn, the Hall of Famer's up in this bitch, and he's going to fix it. And we all knew that it was going to be fixed. We didn't know how, but we were all like, all right, I guess Laurence, and he's got one of those real deep voices and stuff. And by the way, it was a fix. It was called Ride Along, and the movie became a huge hit.
Oh, my God.
So, so Laurence knows that from doing movies at the age of 14, that you have to take care of. You can't just come in and say, this sucks.
Right.
You got to come in. If you're going to do that, you got to show everybody a way out. And he did it with, he did it collaboratively. He empowered everybody. And, it seems to me that we talk a lot about the differences in power, and there's the power that forces you to bow your head and cast your eyes to the floor and do as you're told. And that would be Stalin's power and Hitler's power and Saddam Hussein's power. And those powers never last. They end up leaving just as a legacy of ashes and mutiny. And then, of course, there's the power that brings your eyes up and you can't stop staring at the guy and you want to be like them and you want to walk through fire for him.
That's right.
Not out of fear, but out of awe and out of inspiration.
I love that.
Yeah, and that's, of course, what we always have to remind ourselves of. That's the real power, the power to awe, not the power to, cause fear, to humiliate, and all the other stuff.
That's it. And that power seems like it's kind of magical when you encounter it. But think about what Fishburne did. Like he told the truth, which is he recognized there was a problem. He named the problem, and then he connected to the group. Like that's a 3-part move, right? That's 3 emotional moments, and you see that in great cultures all the time. Like that is not magic. That feels like magic when you experience it, but it's not.
Did you ever see? It's called The Lion of the Pashtun.
No.
About Masood. Masood, who was the leader of the Northern Alliance, and he was killed by Al Qaeda.
Yeah.
And he was because they knew he respected journalists, and so he allowed them in with their cameras, but the cameras were rigged to explode.
Yeah.
And the suicide bombers, and that's how they killed Masood. But Masood was a very, very effective military leader and had fought the Soviets. And was legendary. I mean, and if you see him, a beautiful man, like a kind of a what you'd consider a warrior general, but he was also a warrior poet. And Masood used to read his men poetry that he wrote and that others wrote.
Yeah.
And then he would give them these really amazing emotional speeches. And it wasn't mein Kampf, it wasn't Deutschland über alles. It was not at all that. It had nothing to do with him. It had to do with the greater sort of good, and they were love poems. They were love poems. And then he would talk about you have to be careful because sometimes a leader will talk about sacrifices. They lead you into the sort of cutting machine, into the meat grinder. No, not so. It reminded me of this book. He was really able to give his men a reason to fight, and the reason behind it was actually love, was to fight for a better way, to fight injustice, to fight for equality, all these things that we talk about.
God.
And so they had an ideology that was rooted in something that they loved. It wasn't rooted in, we hate those guys, let's kill those guys. In fact, he was very respectful of taking prisoners and not killing them, in a lot of ways. Really interesting.
That's
incredible.
Yeah.
Because what you're signaling all the time, and I think this is what's interesting, is that you draw out these 3 big themes in the book, and the first theme is really about safety. And the thing that I kept on thinking about is college campuses, where they talk about safe spaces, but they're actually not safe spaces, because your belonging is constantly under threat if you don't toe the party line on what's being said. And so what a real safe space is that we are a family. We love you no matter what. We will always accept you as a person. And that safety then enables us to make an unsafe space for your ideas, where the ideas are not you and we can tear them apart as much as we want because we're not questioning you or your value or your belonging.
You said it. The ideas are not you. And I think you talk about that in the book, don't you? The ideas are not you. They're not. It's not you that we're tearing apart. We're tearing apart the ideas.
That's exactly right. You get the feedback. The feedback is always coming. You're getting high candor feedback. You have these extraordinary. The safety enables people to be vulnerable. Like that's the 2-step, right? If you're super safe, then you can sort of say, hey, that was a crappy idea, but you know that I'm not attacking you. You know that you're here. That's the Popovich thing. That's the Dave Cooper thing, to be able to say, hey, that was a big screw up. That was a screw up, but you're not a screw up. So it's this, they constantly are sending, you can sort of visualize it on 2 channels, right? I'm going to give you total truth, but I'm going to give you total love. And it's not an accident. It's not like we always talk about chemistry, right? Oh, that group had great chemistry. That group had really clicked. That feeling you have in a group clicking. And when you realize what's going on, that click is actually, there's physics underneath that. And that physics is the love poem, the connection, the feeling, the humanity, the sense of belonging and safety with like what's really happening, like truth. Like we're going to talk about our weaknesses. We're going to be open. We're not going to hide them.
And by the way, that's a very, very important point because in Blindsided by Barbara, I think Enright, I think that's her name.
Ehrenreich.
What's it?
Well, I'll butcher it, so we'll just go with Barbara.
And she wrote essentially about this sort of this corporate culture got really into sort of getting positive, getting behind things, and it's positive. And they'd have these big seminars about vibrating with positivity no matter what.
Yeah.
And sort of like, if you have the will to succeed and you look at the positive of everything, then what happens is we're going to get really successful. And they would hire these CEOs who were essentially cheerleaders. Problem is that doesn't work.
No.
And the reason it doesn't work is because you can't just be blindly positive. You've also got to be rather critical about your thinking.
Yeah, that's right.
And that requires an honest, like you said, a safe space to be honest and to throw out your ideas that, and I want to you use an amazing example in the beginning of the book about groups, and groups of 4.
Right.
And they have to take 26 pieces of uncooked spaghetti, I think, a yard of yarn, a yard of tape, a marshmallow, and construct create the highest structure.
Yep.
With the only, and I don't want to give too much away in the book, but the marshmallow's got to be on top.
Yep. That's the only rule.
And you've got these groups, one of which is kindergartners.
Yep.
The other is CEOs.
Yep.
And then you've got lawyers and business students.
Yeah.
Why did the kindergartners win?
It's a kind of it's a great question. It was a contest. They had a short amount of time, simple task, simple but kind of tricky task, right? Everybody starts. I like to picture them in a big room, right? They're all together, like a big soccer field, and they're all going. The adults all start, and it looks like just the embodiment of perfect cooperation. Like they're talking, they're making a plan, they're analyzing their roles, they're making suggestions. It looks smooth and fluent and wonderful. And the kindergartners are just total chaos. They're just grabbing shit and cramming it together. So if you had to bet your life savings on which one was going to win, you'd probably say, like, the adults look like they're pretty good, right? They're probably going to win. But in fact, the kindergartners win because the adults only look like they're cooperating. Like, underneath, status management is playing with them. Underneath, they're status management. They're like, they look like they're cooperating, but underneath the surface, there's this like little whisper in their heads that's in all of our heads, which is, where do I fit into this group? Like, where do I really fit in? And is it okay to say that? Like, it's where do I land? Who's in charge here? And that eliminates cooperation. That slows idea flow. They're talking about this problem. The kindergartners are actually doing something about the problem. They're actually iterating and experimenting, and the feedback is evident, and so they fix it. And they're just energetically putting action into the problem. So they're safe. They're completely safe. Yeah. And so they win. Yeah. And so they win every time. The adults, it's incredible. It's the status management that is always there. So what these great groups do is they realize safety makes you smart. With a group, safety makes you smart. It ain't about how smart you are. It's about how safe you are. And if you can get that shoulder-to-shoulder, energetic interaction, of course, like you have on the show, that you actually get something good, right? I mean, you get something that's better than if you're sort of wondering, geez, should I say that? Is that okay? Like, what would the show be like if you guys were constantly wondering if you were worried about your status in the group? It absolutely would. It'd fall apart.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. There's this. Somebody said to me, you should call it the Bryan Callen Show because you have a lot of followers on social media. I said, that's fine. That's great. But the problem is the problem is that this guy to my left is such an integral part of mixed mental arts, from coming up with a name to driving sort of the curriculum and stuff like that, that it would just be completely dishonest and it'd just be ridiculous. What am I going to do? It's the Bryan Callen Show, parentheses, and that guy Hunter Moss, he does all the work. But it's just you lose when you do that. You ultimately lose when you are concerned with your own status.
Exactly.
And by the way, and I want to piggyback on what you're saying about safety. Yeah. When, at least for me, in the business I'm in, where I have to come up with a whole new hour of comedy. I'm about to shoot my 3rd special, I hope soon.
Whoa.
But the problem is, when you develop a following, sometimes you can, as a writer or as a comic, become preoccupied with one question. A similar question. What is masculinity? Or what is the nature of fear? Or whatever it might be. And you have to create a safe space alone sometimes. You have to create a safe space for yourself. You've got to sort of figure out a way sometimes to get out of how you define yourself what has worked in the past, and all those things can become creative traps. And drawing a blank slate in your mind and getting into that danger zone, trying things that you've never tried before, and trying to do almost reinvent yourself requires a great deal of you've got to create a safe zone for yourself to kind of go off in that direction and not be afraid you're going to lose yourself, or not be afraid you're going to make a mistake, or not be afraid that people aren't going to like you. And that's a huge part of it. So I think the same mindset follows when you're trying to be creative on your own, when you're trying to come up with ideas.
And I've just to build off of that, like, because that was very nice, and I thank you. But a lot of what I've realized that my job is with this show is to create a safe space for Bryan, where Bryan, people get boxed in, you get told you're a comic, and therefore, who are you to think that you could engage with these big ideas? And so the point is to create a space where Bryan can, be exposed to people like you, be exposed to these ideas. And then for me, what I ultimately care about is moving the ideas. And ultimately, that's what it's going to translate into, is Bryan doing the stand-up comedy that really moves these ideas and makes people feel safe. Because it's then for the audience. Like, these are funny, you can relate to them, and you can feel safe exploring them.
That's what I love about your book. That's what I love about Talent Code. That's what I love about the Culture Code. Because you break down that mystery. You make see, excellence or effectiveness as a group or as an individual, whether you're an athlete or you're playing an instrument or whether you're trying to start a business, is accessible to you.
Right.
And that's what you prove in your books. I mean, that's what I love so much about it. You kind of... there's a code, right? There is a culture code. There is a talent code. There is, and that's what's so beautiful about sort of your work. I mean, and that's why that's why we were excited to talk about this.
Thanks, man. No, I really appreciate that, because it's sort of like, I think our culture works to tell the narrative of success really well. Like, you hear about SEAL Team 6, or you hear about the Indians doing well, or whatever it might be. And that's a beautiful narrative, and it's almost addictive. Like, we love it. We love that. A magical team. Those SEALs are just amazing. And then you go into the story, and you're like, wait a minute. Why did they succeed that night in Abbottabad? Why did they do that? Well, it was because there was this group of guys who were just always focused on improving their weakness. Like, they didn't trust these helicopters. It was much messier than the story we were told. And I tell the story in the book as a lot of awkward interactions actually are underneath this thing. A lot of like people being kind of pissed and vulnerable and trying to say, this isn't going to work. We got to do that again, do that again, do that again, and keep focusing on our weakness. And it wasn't smooth at all. But the result is smooth because they're able to, leaders at key moments are able to send a signal to get the group to see the truth and be honest with each other and work together. And that's not magic. That's a human sort of cool and a human sort of success that as you say, is accessible.
I just thought it was amazing that Dave Cooper, you know why he's such a badass. Not because he's full of muscles, not because he's 6'8", but because he went, new helicopters? I don't know. Well, now for me, I would have been like, that's the U.S. military. It's a new helicopter, bro. First of all,
deal with it.
It costs $1 billion. They work, okay? Because the U.S. government made it.
Right.
And he was like, it's new. I don't know, dude. We're gonna have some problems.
Right. Totally. He stood up and he had to do that not once but many times, because all the pressure is kind of this authoritarian thing. Do it. And he kept like, this isn't gonna work. Let's do another downed helicopter drill. What do you want to do today? I want to do another downed helicopter drill. I want to do another one. I want to do another one. So many that they got absolutely sick of doing them. And then the night comes, the helicopter goes down, they flow out of it, everything is smooth because they were working together as a team and saw the truth, and because Cooper was that guy. He Fishburned him.
He Fishburned him.
Yeah.
We got a problem, but we're going to fix it. We do? Yeah, this doesn't work.
This doesn't work.
Does it?
It's exactly the same interaction. Like, that is a thing. That's a move. That's a leader move. And again, it's not magic, it's leadership.
How did you get access to these Jewelry Thieves?
There's a woman her name was Havana Marking, and she did a film about him that's quite good called Smash and Grab. And so she did a lot of interviews with him, and she was my pathway in. So that was...
Did they get it? Did they ever get caught?
Some of them did, and then they had this thing where they were so tight that they would break each other out of prison. Like, Swiss prisons are not apparently that great. Like, they got...
Wow.
They put a ladder up to the fence, threw a bag of guns over, and broke themselves out, wire cutters and guns, and they broke themselves out. So it's like, we're getting our guy out of there. It's a Swiss prison.
Damn.
Yeah.
Yep.
Damn it! And why were they in jail in Switzerland? That's where I guess they got caught.
Yeah, that's where they got caught. The international, finally, sort of Interpol and stuff got on them, and they basically squashed them once they figured out what was going on.
Now they're probably in Serbia, still doing their thing.
They are maybe negotiating with Leo DiCaprio. I heard he was trying to get a movie about them.
About the Pink Panthers,
yes,
as they're called.
Correct.
Yep. But the other interesting thing too is I'm sure you know John Haidt's work. And, it really is like when, so often he talks about sort of homo duplex, which is Durkheim's thing. And you have individuals moving around as bees, but periodically they have the ability to organize into these swarms, these hives. And like reading about the Pink Panthers moving through, even the way they move through the jewel shop, there's a coordination of movement that's seamless. It's not that they're having to like awkwardly have that friction of communicating it verbally because they're so in sync at that point that like a basketball team or SEAL Team 6 or Google or anything like that, they can just, like you said, swarm over the problem and break it down and solve it.
It's so fun to watch the tapes of them because you can put them all next to each other. You could put the like San Antonio Spurs, put the passing the ball around. Then you can watch this footage of these guys. Then you can watch SEAL Team footage doing the same thing. And then you could even watch something like footage in a restaurant, of one of Danny Meyer's restaurants, one of the top ranked restaurants in the world, and watch people flow. It's all the same stuff. It's about awareness. It's about knowing what the purpose is, what the higher purpose is, and it's about knowing exactly where you need to be at any given time, but also this fluidity to it, where it is really like a school of fish moving through this problem together. But there's a selflessness that's going on there where you're not in your own head. You are really kind of with the team.
Well, in this smash and grab, the Pink Panthers, they are so dependent on each other's roles, and it's a lot like SEAL Team 6. My buddy was in Dev Group SEAL Team 6, and I had a long talk with him about this after I read the book. And he said, "Dude, you just know what your role is, okay? So everybody does their job.
Yep.
But then the thing is, you need to know what to do when someone doesn't do their job, or when someone gets hit and someone gets killed or whatever it might be. Then you fall in. So it's exactly like that. It's sort of a hive. It's a school of fish.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah. It's beautiful to see. You know what I mean? It's beautiful to see. But that kind of dependence brings with it the people that get part of that. It's almost addictive. Like you see it in improv comedy. You see it with the SEALs. These guys say like, I tried to quit, but I couldn't because it was really hard. It wasn't like it was really fun, but I didn't get that relationship. I didn't have that sort of high of doing something bigger than myself with this amazing group. And we all know that feeling. We've had that in our lives at different points, maybe in sports or you've had it in entertainment. It's addictive. When you sort of disappear into the group is a super cool moment.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a lot of, I think, the appeal of groups like ISIS as well. You have these young men who are isolated and then they have this experience of being part of something larger. And I think a lot of it is that it's simply that experience of being really embedded in something that is so appealing, and that the
especially
danger,
when it's high stress.
And when it's high stress,
because you create bonding chemicals. You create, I think, oxytocin and things like that.
Right.
I mean, they've done a lot of studies on that. When you're in a team, if you're in a group of combat Marines or whatever it is, you're brothers, man.
Yeah.
You get very close to those people.
Right.
And I think the other thing that, maybe it's the writer's brain, but, it's always nice to see a master of his craft at work. And then the second thing is that, I was just really struck by the intentionality of the language in all of these groups. Like when you talk about the Nyquists, I think was it Rosie or what was her name? Roshi?
Roshi Gavechi.
Yeah. Yeah. But the fact that she used the word that she surfaces ideas, which is such an intentional word, and really says that there is a process here that is emergent. I am not making it happen. I am simply midwifing it in. I'm facilitating it.
Exactly.
So how intentional are these groups about the words they use?
Very. I mean, that language matters. It really carries a metaphor with it. It carries an image with it. And so whenever they're really good at using language to kind of help define their purpose. When I first started visiting these places, I kind of thought they wouldn't, I don't know, I sort of didn't think they would use catchphrases. I sort of thought they wouldn't sort of have a lot of slogans around. I thought like, well, SEALs know what SEALs do. Like, they don't need to remind themselves that they're, badass, cool, teams. They actually do remind themselves that they're badass, cool teams all the time. Like, they say it in their language. There's artifacts around. The same things at Pixar, the same things at Danny Meyer's restaurant. And they're almost creating this sort of mental map, like this landscape that really captures key behaviors. Where it was most vivid for me was in this restaurant where it was one of the top ranked restaurants in the world, and they have tons of language. And at first it feels like you're at summer camp. Like it feels kind of hammy and bullshitty. Like, why is everyone talking about, athletic hospitality? Why is everybody talking about the excellence reflex? Or the worst one was like, mistakes are waves, and our servers are the surfers of those waves. Like they're just like, you listen, you hear that, and you're kind of like, that's stupid. Is your first reaction?
When you step in, you're like, fuck.
What is
on
this?
Your 12th hour?
What is this? Is camp? Like, am I in summer camp now? But then you see somebody spill a big tray of dishes or have some moment where it's like, oh, wait a minute, there's this big mistake. How are they going to react to that? Like that idea that mistake is a wave that you're going to surf to some destination sounds cheesy, is actually a real distillation of what you do as a good waiter or what you do as a good service worker. And so they like intentionally compose this stuff. Like they're like, those, I think of like Nashville where they have all those country songwriters, churning out stuff, right? At these cultures, they're very intentional about defining the key behaviors like surfacing and really, really using that as this cognitive like roadmap or signpost that says this is what we want. This is what you should do when you encounter a problem. You should Fishburne them. Like they would use something like that, right? And so to me it seems it's like they're not cheesy catchphrases. They're actually like smart catchphrases, and they're super intentional about building. But it always makes you think like, where are those in my life? Like I need those for my kids. Like when
there are a lot of cultures that could use this. I don't think Japanese cultures are very much like this a lot of times. I might be wrong, but I watched Hero Dreams of Sushi, and the guy had to make the egg custard over and over again for 3 months until he had it perfect. And of course, perfect meant he had to do it exactly like his sensei.
Yeah.
The Japanese martial arts for a long time before they started fighting in sort of vale-tudo and cages where anything goes. You always did exactly what your sensei told you, and to actually innovate out of that would be, to have your sensei lose face. It would be considered sort of heretical. So I wonder, have you done a study of that? Have you seen sort of a lot of cultures that seem to be good at mimicry, but not necessarily innovation?
Yeah, that sort of mimicry culture, which is essentially authoritarian, right? If Hero screws up, he's done, right? Works really well in a zero-sum game. Like when there's only so much steel industry in America, you can have this one way to do it, and you better mimic it, and there's only one ruthless path to success, zero sum, boom. But when it's not a zero sum game, and when it's about growing stuff and growing capability, not just delivering on some thing over and over again, but actually growing things, and when the problems are more complex than making egg custard or whatever, were complex problems, that backfires. Like you can't do that because you turn too many people off. Like if instead, if actually instead of, substitute, instead of making that piece of sushi or whatever, substitute like writing good code for that. Like you can't do it that way. You have to connect to people, create safety, create all this culture stuff kind of has a feel good, humanistic part to it. But actually it's the most efficient way to go. It's just functional. It's just the most efficient way to solve complex non-zero sum problems is with the hive mind, not with
I wonder.
Just to push back on the whole Japanese thing, I think it's also a question of what Japanese culture does particularly well. And if you look at, they're very good at optimizing, right? So the Japanese don't come up with the car plant, but the Toyota production system optimizes it because there is a real safety and belonging within the community. There is a real tightness, but it's about making Kaizen, tiny incremental changes to make the process more effective and more efficient.
Yep.
And the challenge always is that any virtue can become a vice.
Right.
And that's what you find with most cultures. I would say American culture, standing out and being different is such a virtue that the vice is that it becomes very difficult to coordinate the group and have effective group action. Cough, cough. American politics right now. So there's the challenge, and I think what's impressive about the sort of groups that Dan is looking at in the culture code is that they really have the wisdom to know the difference. Like safety and belonging is great, but at the same time, like we have to protect that safety and belonging by dealing with the bad apples who would threaten that safety and belonging and exclude those bad apples.
But you know, Google, when they fired James Damore,
Yeah.
you know, for writing this memo that I read twice that was kind of looking at the available science that he had been reading on the differences between men and women, and one of the things was there might be biological reasons for why fewer women are in coding.
Mm-hmm.
He got fired because he created, quote unquote, an unsafe work environment for women. I had a problem with that, but I mean, it's up to Google if they want to fire a senior engineer for that. I had a problem with it. I understand, though, that I can understand how Google would be very sensitive to, because when I heard unsafe work environment, it annoyed the shit out of me. Because I was like, an unsafe work environment would be the battlefield, a fucking crab fishing boat in Alaska, and a coal mine. You pussies. You left-wing pussy. Google engineers are not unsafe. I'll beat up the whole fucking cafeteria right now, all right? I mean, I go crazy about this stuff. But having said all that and all my usual tantrum, where I go, I also recognize that there is something very important about creating it depends on what you mean by safe. And Google probably had their hackles up because they did want to preserve a culture that's been so effective.
Right.
So I'll give them not a pass on firing, but certainly a pass on their overreaction.
Right.
God, I'm so generous.
I'm sure Sergey Brin and Larry Page are just like, phew.
I know, I'm sure they are.
Got the Callan pass.
They got the Callan pass.
But also I think the important thing to understand, right, is that the narrative that we see again and again through the culture code is we are a team, we are a family, and the point is that James Damore told a story with that memo. Mm-hmm. And that story was that maybe some of us shouldn't be in this family. Maybe we don't belong in this family, or maybe we're being included for the wrong reasons. So he's challenging that narrative. And the point is that Google, I mean, Dan Coyle is, of course, because he mixes with people who are far more powerful and influential than us, but we're his favorites.
We are his favorites.
He's gonna be going to Google. So if you have thoughts for Sergey and Larry, you should just pass them on to Dan, and Dan will pass them on.
Do you think, I don't want to get you in trouble because you probably have a relationship, but do you think that was part of do you have an insight on why you think?
I just think the science that he was using to advance his argument was pretty faulty, really flawed. So I think that's to me, that's at the core of it. Like, what you're making this suggestion with science that's weak and
a lot of evolutionary biologists, like, who was it? Pretty famous guy, said everything he said has been.
Well, but that's the big problem of science, is that science is not a clear, coordinated culture, and the problem is that science is at this point like the internet. Like, if you want to go find an expert who's going to back up whatever opinion you have, you can find it. And the challenge is, and I think we had this conversation before, but I also had this conversation with Mark Schatzker, who wrote The Dorito Effect. And, as writers and, as podcasters, we get the chance to range across a lot of science and see patterns that sometimes people who are deep in the ivory tower and deep down that rabbit hole don't see. But in general, the real process of science should be that we have the safety to explore any idea. Like, we're not going to reject you for having an idea, and then we can just have an idea dojo where we just tear apart all ideas and may the best ideas win.
One of the traps in a group, I would imagine a highly effective group, Dan, is that as they get bigger, as they get more successful, as they get famous, that's got to be its own trap. How do they deal with that?
They're very, very few things. They're very, very, very careful about who they bring in, right? Hiring is the single biggest moment. You're bringing somebody new into the tribe. And so it ends up being really, really a careful stepwise process. The hiring in these places was outrageous. The other thing they do is they shut out outsiders and they don't let their story be told. That was one of the biggest challenges I had writing the book, because when you write the San Antonio Spurs and say, hey, I'm doing a book about great culture, what they say is, thanks, but no thanks. What makes us great is not doing stuff like this, right?
Yeah.
So they are not interested. Fortunately, through some relationships I had in baseball, I was able to sort of demonstrate my bona fides and be able to spend some days. But then here's the other thing. When they let you in, when really good culture lets you in, they let you in totally. Totally.
Really?
So when San Antonio said, yes, we'll have you out, I get to the airport and I get a text from the general manager of the team, R.C. Buford. He picks me up at the airport and I spend most of the next 3 days at his house and going to practice and going to like they let you in totally because they realize, look, they want to learn. They want to learn about good culture. So they turned it into like this learning opportunity for themselves. And they also feel like we really want to show you everything we can show you. That's part of what makes us great. So they all have that same sort of combination of like, you can't come in, never leave. Like that was kind of the combination as a journalist.
Because they wanted to learn about themselves, maybe.
Exactly. They want to see a mirror. They want to know what other cultures are doing. And they want you to have a fair shot. You know, they want you to really see everything so that you can report on them fairly. And so that part of it was really interesting. But so they're all kind of struggling.
Has Popovich read your book? Do you know?
I don't know yet. I'm waiting for some feedback. Hopefully some, maybe either we'll share a glass of wine or I'll get yelled at.
Have any of the SEAL Team 6 guys like Dave Cooper read your book
yet?
Yeah.
Oh, he has. Yeah, he has. He enjoyed reading it, and he's actually, this is classic. He's in Oxford now, getting a degree at Oxford on leadership. Like this is how these guys are, right? He's trying to get it on another great team and be a part of that.
Well, one of the interesting things that Coop talked about in the book was the fact that the thing that really drew him to the SEALs was hearing that they were voracious readers.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's shockingly true. Like the SEALs have a rep, kind of as the quiet professionals and everything. But as you probably know with your friend, it's like these guys put learning first. They are voracious learners. I'm sure you have a lot of listeners who are in that community too.
Yeah, very much so. I'm always struck by how articulate they are.
God.
And non-linear. A lot of military guys, a lot of athletes, a lot of people tend to be linear because they have to be.
Right.
And even in their ethos, duty, honor, loyalty, these are linear concepts. And to be really effective in the fog of war, those high-level guys they know a lot about a lot. And
it's reflected. It's not just something they come with. It's reflected in every iteration of their training. Like if you're in Delta Force, it's like, what's the final test? I think it's put on a rucksack and run 60 miles by yourself.
Well, you gotta walk. You gotta navigate on a map. That's what I've read. I don't know. My buddy's a Delta guy. You have to walk forever
by yourself, right?
Yeah.
You are alone. You would never be alone in the SEALs. Ever, for anything. It's all like, let's go out in a raft, we'll turn it upside down, and we'll trade life vests. Now you're in charge, now I'm in charge. They group every iteration. So it's not just a question of, these SEAL guys are nonlinear thinkers and learners. It's that they've created, through their culture, this thing where that gets constantly built and constantly reinforced. And it's a beautiful thing, and you see it in the field.
I want to know the secret behind the Patriots. Have you done any work on that? Belichick looks like he never smiles.
Right.
He just seems like the ultimate field general.
Right.
And he seems like just such a curmudgeon or whatever the word is.
I know.
But you got Brady. You got. It seems like Brady and Belichick are the constants.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. I could be playing for them. I could be on the line.
Right.
And somehow they would win.
We would win.
It's unreal, man.
A few thoughts on them. I think while he does sort of broadcast this authoritarian thing, I think people talk about a deeper relationship they occasionally have with him. Not a lot, but a little. But football by its nature is kind of this. It is this zero-sum authoritarian thing where a guy like that can still succeed in that type of system. You don't see many Belichicks in basketball. You don't see many Belichicks in baseball. Why?
Because it's flow. It's more flow.
Exactly.
It's not a game of inches that way.
It's a different task. It's a different task. This is basically high-speed chess, decision-making patterns, systems, zone. They're basically trying to outflank each other all the time. And in basketball, you got to have your guys on the court make good decisions. They have to be in charge of solving the problem. It's not a scheme game. It's not a scheme game. That's why Popovich will walk away from his huddle. Like sometimes in games, you'll see him walk away, and the players don't realize it right away. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh, it's a timeout, and he's not coming back, and we have to figure this out for ourselves. And it's this great moment of like, well, actually, that's what he's trying to create. Like, you guys own this. Go solve it. And that doesn't happen in a sport like football. Plus, there's the fact that the Patriots. I mean, I don't want to bring up any words like the fact that they seem to bend the rules as much as possible in sports. I don't want to bring that up, but I think it's true.
We're over that. We're over Inflategate. Jesus. Talk about a Cleveland fan. Dude, I mean... God,
listen, we all have our tribalisms.
I was going to say, the Browns...
But that's interesting about like the decentralized nature of basketball, and the whole thing that I kept on thinking as I was reading this book is that everything that you describe in here is everything that the wider world and the internet is not. It's like the playbook for success is the polar opposite of what most of humanity is doing most of the time.
That's interesting.
Yeah. How much? I mean, what is, it seems like when we know what works, we should all increasingly be doing it. And I guess that's the question is, I'm hoping that this sells 7.5 million copies and then everybody's like, oh, duh, like this is how we should be all behaving towards each other all the time.
Right.
But, how much do you think it's important to start to have some uncomfortable conversations about, of course what you're doing is not working. You're not fish burning it. You're not, being a Popovich. You're not having that Nyquist type ability to surface ideas.
Right.
How much does that inform you, Dan, as a person?
It's funny. Somebody asked me a question the other day, like how has writing this book sort of changed, how you behave, how you parent, how you communicate. And it really does. Like when you realize how things work, you make less sort of wisecracking remarks. I have to say, except for this interview, I make fewer wisecracking remarks after doing this. Listening is completely different. You sort of realize how important listening is, and these little, when you see the world that way, you both kind of recognize the gap that you're talking about, Hunter, that how many, like, why don't people get that? Why does that guy at the service station, like, doesn't he understand that if he doesn't look people in the face, people aren't going to go to his service station, right? But then you do see people tune into it and you see the power of it. And I think when we think about places in our lives, like our favorite bakery, our favorite school, or our favorite family, or our favorite business, like, when we realize that's what that is, like it's these moments of warm connection that tie us to each other and to teams, it's something to me that speaks powerfully to this moment, this moment with all the politics that we're dealing with and with everything else in this country, this big divide, that the way across it isn't through persuasion, arguing, nothing high-minded, nothing ivory tower. It's like low, simple, human connection. And
look, man, I mean, first of all, to be really effective at this, that's why good entrepreneurs are fun to talk to. And I always make it, like when I have some friends that have very successful restaurants.
Yep.
And one of my friends, I said, what's your secret, man?
Yeah.
I mean, he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's just a macho guy and everything else. But man, he's got these incredible restaurants. And I said, how do you find good employees? You know what he said? He goes, I don't find good employees. I make good employees.
That's awesome.
And see, he had a chef that was, he could tell that this chef was really kind of had a lot of talent, but just 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and just wasn't responsible. It was just a kind of a fuck up. So he took that chef with the chef's wife on this insane, all expense paid weekend in Las Vegas. I mean, pulled out all the stops. And they ate at every good restaurant in Vegas and New York. Actually, they went to Vegas and New York.
Oh my God.
So it was actually it was almost a week long, but they ate at every good restaurant you can think of. And the best wine and everything else. And the whole time he kept talking about how this guy could, in front of his wife, how he could do this and how he believed in him and how he had the potential to be this good and that nothing here should intimidate him. And so he made him, not only, he created a mythology around this guy.
Wow.
And he made this guy feel, he gave him this sense of worth and responsibility.
Yeah. And
in front of the woman he loved. And spent all this money on him. And guess what? He became an all-star chef, man. He's a killer.
That's
and now
incredible.
he trains other chefs and he just made a whole turnaround. Stopped smoking weed every day, stopped doing blow all the time, and just became a consummate professional.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, to your point, I don't think that, the world will ever be, will embrace the culture code like that. There are going to be, that's why people like Dave Cooper and my buddy and Popovich are so rare.
Yeah.
And this has always been my argument for why you reward extraordinary people and why you should have a system of government and an economic system that rewards those that have the ingenuity, the intelligence, the creativity to come up with this stuff. It's why I get so annoyed when, and God bless them, but when we have a lot of academics on this show that are very, very smart, but they'll sort of start touting the Scandinavian way of governing, or we should tax people 80%. They don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And the reason they don't know what the fuck they're talking about is because they don't live in the real world, man.
Right.
I'm sorry. You come run a restaurant.
Right.
Go run 6 businesses, and you tell me that now I'm going to take 80% of your money.
Right.
You don't know what you're talking about. That's not how you create value. And I'm not saying money's the only value, but you better be damn careful about messing around with what we're really talking about is taking somebody's 80% of a chunk of someone's decision making.
And we're really talking about is relationships. Like your story about that guy is about somebody recognizing and building a relationship. And that's at the core of all the happiness in life.
You have to preserve the incentive structure for that.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't think it's a mistake. I don't think it's a coincidence that we live, that the countries that have preserved the incentive structure, i.e. the money you can make from being an effective leader, has to be part of the equation. Sometimes, most of the times, once in a while, I don't know what the ratio is, but I know it's a factor. I know we have to make sure that those things are, I mean, this smash and grab, the Pink Panthers got away with $105 million worth of diamonds. I know that's part of it's the juice.
Look, here's a question for you, Dan. I mean, to tie it back, I can't remember if you talked about this in the talent code, but, teams that have massive disparities in income, where there are a few all-star players who make much, much more than other players, are much less effective than teams where everybody is paid much more equitably. Isn't that true?
That's right. The hierarchy matters because it's a signal of safety and connection, right? I mean,
that's right. So when you start to have massive wealth concentrations in a small number of people's hands, that undermines that sense that we're really a team.
There's no question about that. I mean, and good entrepreneurs will reward their teams. I mean, Springsteen, for the longest time, split the money evenly with all his band members. For most of his career.
That's
Every
awesome.
one of his band, they all got the same amount of money.
And great leaders eat last. That's what great leaders do.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, who was that? Who was that great leader who would always eat last? I can't remember what it was, but there was a famous story about a guy who always took his meal last. There's no question that whatever, but allow people the choice for that.
Yeah.
By the way, Larry Page and Sergey Brin have some cash. They got a lot of money. So I don't know how equitable it is, and it doesn't matter. They've earned it. But,
I think the point, Bryan, is, and I think what you often object to, and I totally understand that, is that the point is for the government to come in and impose something that is you're using dominance rather than that prestige.
Correct.
It's the kind of power that bows heads rather than looks up.
That's exactly
and
right.
so the point is that if we, as a baseball team, or as Springsteen, choose to divvy up the money pretty evenly because we want to create that sense of belonging, then that's a choice. That's opt in.
You know me, right? So
Yeah.
I'm a free market capitalist libertarian. We can go through all the labels.
Yep.
But I mean, if you ask me, if I'm sitting with a socialist, my hackles are gonna raise. And I'm gonna be like, well, he's the enemy of the state, and I gotta re-educate you. I mean, I'm exaggerating.
Yeah.
But at the same time, personally, I'm a bit of a socialist, aren't I?
Yeah.
Personally, I don't.
Bryan
feel
runs a
comfortable-
one-man welfare state.
Yeah. I promise you, in a group, if I have a group, and if I would have no problem splitting the money.
Yeah.
I'm not personally motivated by, now that my wife likes to ride horses, I am, and I have this house in Santa Monica. But in all seriousness, I personally, I think I love the idea of creating an egalitarian group, a like-minded hive, like-minded, motivated hive that and all of us feel empowered, and all of us have that sort of sense of dignity, self-worth, and we're all making money. We're all happy, man.
Right.
Where the pie is enough for everybody.
Right.
I personally have never. I think you're right. I think when sometimes you get a leader who only knows how to relate when they're above you, not one-on-one, right? And a guy like Dave Cooper realizes that he's got his strengths, but a lot of people have a lot of other strengths. And the other thing I got from your book is if you create an authoritarian air, what'll happen is all those people will sit on their ideas.
That's right.
And you won't see who they really are.
That's right. That authoritarian reflex is a reflex. So you actually have to actively diffuse it. You have to actually say, you can call me Coop, you can call me Dave, or you can call me Fuckface, but you don't call me Commander. Like, you need to say some version of that proactively. You can't just sort of sit back and say, okay, so you're constantly sending these signals, constantly connecting. I mean, yeah, it's...
George Washington said, I didn't fight the Revolutionary War to become George II.
Yeah, right.
I am not the king.
Right.
I am the president. I serve at the will of the people. And that in many ways was the founding of our republic.
Yeah.
So the culture code can go all the way back to a guy like George Washington would have read this book and said, there's a lot here I recognize. I believe that.
Yeah, I totally. And what has made effective cultures throughout history has always been the same, because we haven't changed that much biologically in the last 10,000 years. And the reason why we now have the opportunity to move from islands of excellence to something much more systemic is because that's what human history is. There's a phenomenon. We don't really understand why it's happening. We get why it's happening. Oh, this disease thing is being caused by these bacteria things. And then we can engineer and be much more intentional about making it happen much more reliably. That is the history of human progress. Like, food grew. We were then like, oh, it's these seed things that make it happen. You end up with agriculture. And then you just keep on doing it better and better and more intentionally. And the point is that the genius of Dan Coyle is that he's demystified that process. You now have, in the talent code and the culture code, 2 playbooks.
Yeah.
Like, you guys want to know how to solve that middle child problem that Dan Coyle had as a kid? Well, here it is.
There it is.
There it is. You got 2 books.
I've sent a picture of this book to everybody from Joe Rogan to my buddy Brendan Schaub, to so many people.
Whoa,
so and I'll continue to do that. When is this available?
January 30th. January 30th.
Yeah. The Culture Code.
Yep.
Why don't we release it on that day? Then?
We can do it on that day.
That'd be amazing.
We'll release it. Let's read it the Friday that it's
of that. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Or even, I don't care if we do. Yeah, let's do that, because this is an important book, and we'll push it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to Instagram to my 300,000 followers. I'm going to put a picture of this on, and kind of like talk about it. So, because I think it's very important.
You guys are the best. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the conversation. I mean, you're able to take things to a level that I don't think any other podcast does. The range and depth, the combination.
That's this guy.
It's because it's clearly it's some kind of, you have some kind of chemistry here. I don't know where it comes from. I guess it's just magical.
Well,
it's got to be magical.
It's magical. There's no other way.
There's no other way, bro.
Or it's the fact that the first house that I went to after being born was the Callan household. So we've literally known each other our entire lives.
That's awesome. Oh my God, it shows.
Can you tell us what you're working on next?
I'm trying to figure out what the next book is. So that's where we might do kind of a sort of a workbook, like a user's manual to culture, something sort of more how to after this. But I'm trying to figure out what that next big thing is. So that's the fun part.
Always the challenge, brother.
Oh my God. And it's always something big that's right in front of your nose.
I know.
That, so I'll have to run it past you.
When I have to start a whole new hour of comedy and throw everything away, I tend to just kind of like get into what I'm afraid of and what I'm ashamed of and what makes me feel powerless and what makes me angry and then there's something in all that shit.
Yes,
that
totally. So, that's good. All right, I'm going to take your advice.
Yeah. There you go. Dan Coyle, thank you so much, man.
Hey guys, thanks.
Another
Bryan.
episode of Mixed Mental Arts. That was awesome.
Thank you.
See you out there.
Good.
All right, buddy.
Appreciate it.
Later.